Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Catching-101 TV. As always, super excited about today's guest. He's a guy that I've gotten to meet over the past couple of years online, also in person at CatcherCon as well. But I'm excited to speak to him. So we got a little bit different guest and a little bit different backstory. I'll let him introduce himself. But Jarrod Jones, excited to have you.
How you doing? Excited to be here, Zan. Thank you for the opportunity, and it's kind of a surreal moment for me because your DVD was kind of what got me into catching a little bit, which was one of my first forays into catching. So, kind of a big moment for me when I was asked to be on this. So I'm
No,
excited to
well,
be here.
I appreciate you saying that. I try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on in the catching world. And during CatcherCon, man, you were putting out some awesome like Instagram stories, and it just showed how passionate you were about learning and then going back and sharing with the guys that you work with. And I was like, man, I got to get that energy and that passion on here, and we got to talk sometime. So I appreciate what you're doing. Now you've got a little bit different background than some of the guests. I'd like for you to kind of go ahead and get into that. But before we do, I want to give you a brief opportunity where people can find you on social media or on the internet. And I want to make sure, a lot of podcasts, they kind of wait till the end, the last 30 seconds of the show, but I want to do it early. So if you've got I know Instagram and Twitter, if you want to share those handles, I'll put them on the screen as well, but let people know where they can find you.
Yeah. So Instagram and Twitter are both at Catching Genetics. There's one G, only because like Brandon Oliver, Twitter limited me to 1G instead of 2. So it'll be at Catching Genetics 1G in there. So that's on Instagram, like I said, and Twitter.
Perfect. Well, like I said, I'll make sure to put that on the screen so everybody can find you. But like I said, you've got a little bit different background than some of the guests. It seems like most of the guys, most of the catching world, people grew up catching, that they, stay in it through coaching or through private instruction or whichever, way they can. But you have a little bit different background. So why don't you share that with us?
Yeah, so I'm a former left-handed pitcher. Played some JUCO ball, and I will say I was doing one knee for years because during flat ground we would catch each other, and the secondary or primary was really uncomfortable after a while. So I just kind of dropped to a knee and catch those bullpens from that standpoint. But yeah, I played JUCO ball, ended up stress fracturing both my shins when I was playing. So that was rough. And then went to a 4-year school, needed Tommy John, or at least to clear out some scar tissue. And I was pretty much done. I mean, I could move the baseball, but I really didn't throw hard enough. So after that, I've always loved baseball. It's been the main thing that I've done. So after I got out of school, the economy was going through a recession at that time. And I wanted to, I couldn't find a job, so I wanted to get into baseball. So I hooked on as a volley with a school up in Pennsylvania, Muhlenberg College, for a season before I got a regular 9 to 5 and had to pay the bills. That pretty much changed my life from a coaching standpoint, because I met a gentleman there, Dan Horshock, and he was in the ABCA. He was an ABCA member, and I never knew anything about the ABCA. And he's like, "Yeah, you want to check out this video and that video," and became an ABCA member, and kind of it just took off from there. Long story short, ended up moving to Tampa, where I reside now. Had a 9U team, and I noticed that there wasn't a whole lot in the space of catching, at least that I knew of. There might have been people out there giving lessons, but I didn't know of them at the time. And I know the aha moment for me was one of the kids came to me and asked if I could help break in his new catcher's glove. Excuse me. And I said, sure. So we put on the machine, and this machine is throwing me cutters, sliders, everything. And I'm getting thumbed left and right. I'm like, this is the worst position on the face of the earth. Like, whoever would want to do this is insane. So, but for me, I was like, I want to learn how to do that kind of stuff. Like, I want to really figure it out. And then I went home, watched Grandal, and I'm like, these guys are pocketing baseballs at 95 with incredible movement and stuff. And that was kind of the rabbit hole that I went down. So I guess for a lack of training in the market, there's a bunch of pitching coaches out there, a bunch of hitting coaches. There's probably some fielding coaches, but I just didn't see a whole lot of catching coaches. And so I had some good catchers on my team at the time and wanted to get them better. And that's what really led me down the rabbit hole. And it started with, YouTube stances. And then it went to finding you and then Coach Todd, and, just down the rabbit hole I went, and I've kind of never left. So I do own the left-handed catcher's mitt. So I do get back there and get after a little bit from time to time. But I'll tell you, after receiving off that machine, gave me a lot of respect for my father, who caught me when I was coming up, and he would go back there and have broken fingers, sometimes broken toes, whatever. And I never really understood it to being on that machine, and it was like I said, it was a surreal moment. But I like a challenge, and the catching community is really tight knit, but it's really different too from pitching and hitting kind of Twitter, I guess we'll say. And I really like that. And it's, I mean, I'm a left-handed, I have no business in catching. I'm a left-handed pitcher, and everyone's been like super welcoming, and love trading ideas with those guys. And, you don't see I guess the friction with catching. We're kind of all in it together because it's a smaller group of people.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've said it. If I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. I mean, the catching Twitter world is way better than the pitching guys or the hitting guys or the strength and conditioning guys, whatever. So I do feel like we're fortunate, and guys are open to share and welcoming. I mean, I think you said it perfectly. You're a former left-handed pitcher. You're definitely the first guest who probably has a left-handed catcher's mitt. I'm gonna go ahead and put that out there. I think that's probably a true statement. But it's cool. It's a really cool community of guys online and in person, like I said, at the ABCA or getting together at other conventions. So you absolutely 100% hit the nail on the head with that. Now, I kind of got a couple of questions done, and I will have a few things in mind that I want to speak to you about. But like you said, you don't have necessarily a background in catching, and you kind of got an appreciation for it as you were, working with some guys and catching off a machine. And I can completely relate to that. I feel like a lot of people watch sports and they don't have a true appreciation of how difficult something is. There's a lot of people who, let's say golf, don't even pick baseball. It's easy to critique a golfer, oh man, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And then you go out there and try to hit a slight draw to end up on a particular portion of the green. It's like, holy cow, like I couldn't do that if I had 1,000 balls, and same thing catching. You watch these guys in the big leagues and they make it look really easy. But anybody that's been back there and caught anybody that's even over 90, when you 95 and 98, those are obviously incredibly difficult to catch and to catch well. But even if you're not familiar with it, you're not used to it, catching 90 is challenging. So yeah, I'm with you, and I agree, and I'm glad you stuck around and made it past that first machine session. But let me ask you this. So I want to get into a question for you now. Without having a background in catching, and you were a pitching guy, so you've obviously spent a lot of time in the bullpen and a lot of time around pitching coaches. But not having a background, so to speak, in catching, how do you think that has kind of affected the way that you approach it? Maybe is it giving you a fresh perspective or a fresh lens? Just kind of curious, what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can say I'm fortunate, at least I consider I'm fortunate from the standpoint of I don't fall back on anything that I was taught as a player, because I wasn't taught anything as a player to be a catcher. So I really have to find all the information that I could, does this work? Does this not work? Good information, bad information. I was more of an open book than, had any kind of reference point as, like I said, this is what I did as a catcher. Well, I didn't do anything as a catcher. So I think I was more open-minded, I guess you'd say, maybe, just because I had not had previous training at that position. So I think that really has helped me. And there's things out there that me personally, I consider eyewash, because working in the space that I do primarily with the youth guys, I can see them it's really hard to control your body as a kid. And so when I do drills, I like to have more necessarily body control than kind of flying all over the place, doing quick, rapid blocks, things like that, because I think body control is something that they lack so much at such a long time. Maybe it's 15, 16, they start to get it. Um, but like I said, I mean, I was never doing those kind of rapid blocks or never doing this stuff. So I never kind of fell back to my training, I guess. So I've just kind of, you know, did a lot of research and made my own assumptions and critiques and things that I like and that have worked from there. So I was basically an open book with nothing written on the pages and started to kind of write my own little catching story.
I think that's fantastic explanation. And as you're speaking, as I'm listening to you, what comes to my mind is I can imagine there are a lot of parents that can relate to that story because maybe they grew up playing baseball, maybe they were a pitcher, maybe they were a shortstop, maybe they didn't play at all, maybe basketball was their sport, but their son grows up and he's a catcher and they're really a blank slate just like you, and there's no reference points, and they want to help their sons or daughters as much as possible. And so they kind of start diving in as well and start, researching or watching videos or reading articles or whatever it is. But I think that's a very familiar story to a lot of people who are listening to this. So if you had to give those people any advice, I would imagine there's a learning curve. Like you said, you had to decipher, the good information from the bad information. And that's something I completely believe in. I think it's going to be more challenging going forward with the next generations because there's just an abundance of information out there. But what would be some advice, as you kind of navigated those waters that you'd give to a parent who's kind of trying to do the same thing? Maybe they don't have a background in catching, but they want to help their players or their son as much as possible, just like you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things is I think for me the ABCA, like the first thing I went to was YouTube, and then like I said, I was able to find you. If you find quality instruction, I mean, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram has made it so easy. Like if this was '04, '05, I wouldn't be doing catching because you just couldn't really find the information. Those platforms weren't out there. So it's made it really easy. But honestly, really look at like Catching 101. I mean, I'm that did a lot for me, just that DVD alone, and it gave me a base. Like I said, Coach Todd stuff. I know he works with a lot of youth catchers and whatnot. But if you have a willingness to learn, there's no reason for you not to learn because it's just time, and sometimes it's a little bit of money too. But if it's coming to your kid, I think a lot of parents are willing to spend that kind of money. I know what some of the travel ball costs and things are, so you can probably do it for a fraction of the cost. And you have to get back there and kind of experience it yourself a little bit, because it's really tough to ask a kid, hey, do this drill for me, and you've never done it, and then you get back there and you see actually how hard that drill or what you're asking them to do really is.
Mhm.
So again, just be an open book, be willing to learn, and just do your research. I mean, Jerry Weinstein's books are another incredible resource. I mean, that guy's he released his recent book, and that book's incredible. I mean, I've just learned so much from that kind of stuff. So if you like to read, it's print media, it's videos, whatever, you can find it.
Yeah, Jerry's definitely one of those guys that's forgotten more baseball than most people know, I think. So
Yeah.
definitely a good resource. I can put my stamp of approval on that as well. So good stuff. And I'm with you. I was kind of thinking as you were speaking, about actually getting back there and doing it and trying. Uh, I think about myself like at camps. I'm talking to guys about hip mobility and ankle mobility and being able to get in the proper position and this and that. And it's a lot more difficult now that I'm getting closer to 40 than it was when I was 25, 26. But I do think it's valuable, especially with the stances and kind of the new things that are going on, that coaches are, hey, I don't think coaches need to be proficient in everything. I get it with age, we can't do that. Like if you asked me to get in a batting cage and hit off a 80-mile-an-hour machine, I'm sure that would probably blow me away right now. I haven't taken swings in years. But I do think that getting back there and actually feeling it can help you have an appreciation of what a position player or a catcher specifically is trying to go through, as you're asking them to try some of these new stances and new things. And like you said, you kind of started with that, you had been catching on a knee for quite some time before it might have become, let's say popular or new age or whatever word you want to choose. But I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on that initially. And also because you work with younger guys. Now, I know I get a lot of emails from parents. They say, hey, coach, my son is 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. We see all these guys transitioning into a one knee stance. Should we be transitioning to a one knee stance yet? So I'd love to kind of get your overview on what you think about the stances and maybe what you teach with that, and then also how that relates, to younger guys, not just guys that you see on TV.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I would say October of last year, living in Florida, we're kind of blessed because we have all those tournaments, the big tournaments down there and whatnot. And I went over to a perfect game tournament. It was 14 to maybe 17, if I remember correctly. And I just, from now on, I'm not a pitching guy. I'm a catching guy. So I watch all the catchers. I like to see what they're doing. And all these kids are on a knee. And I truly wondered if they know why they're on a knee and if they can be proficient on a knee or if it's just the thing to do. And I think for a lot, it's just the thing to do. But let's say we're taking an 8-year-old kid or a T-ball player. If you look at most T-ball kids, they don't really know how to stand when coach puts Johnny back there to catch. So what does he do? He goes on both knees. I think it's a great start just teaching them to catch the ball. I mean, trying to get them, again, I go back to trying to get them to have body control and catch a baseball becomes really, really hard. I think, and I'm upset about this with the electronic strike zone because I'm not a very artsy person, but to me, when I had that aha moment with catching, I found receiving is such an art, which I've never thought of kind of much as an art before, but I thought receiving was just such an art and it would be a shame to see that go. But I think from the younger kids now with being on a knee, I think you're going to start to see a lot more proficiency from the younger guys coming up because me personally, I'd start them on 2 knees, go to a knee, and then go to a secondary stance. And I get it because, what is it, 8, 9, the pass balls don't necessarily matter depending on if you're playing kid pitch or whatever. Um, but I just think that for younger kids, if you can start out on 2 knees, transition to a knee and a secondary, that's where my starting point would be with them. And as far as a whole on a knee, I guess, um, if it works for you, great. You know, I've seen some kids with some hip mobility issues and they have to go to a knee. But, that doesn't mean I don't say to the parents, hey, you might want to go take him to, a strength, stability, and flexibility person, do some yoga with your son, because your money would be better spent with that person right now than it would be with me. Because you have to get into certain positions. And if you can't get into those positions, all the best coaching in the world is not going to do anything for you if your body isn't prepared to do it.
Yeah, you kind of read my mind right there. So again, like I said, I speak to a lot of parents and youth coaches and coaches at all levels. But whether it be through in person or at a camp or through a social media conversation, and I hear a lot of people say very similar things to what you just said. Hey, we tried the traditional stance. He's a younger kid. He's maybe not the most athletic looking type kid, which is typical. You just stick that guy behind home plate, when you're that age, and say, hey, we're going to put him on a knee because he can't get in a traditional stance. And I think there's a little bit more to it than that. I don't think you just, like you said, you don't just stick somebody back there. Hey, he can't move. He's not mobile. Let's just put him on a knee. I think number one priority should be let's try to get him mobile. Let's try to get his hips working better. Let's try to get his ankles to have full range of motion, and so on and so forth. But there is kind of a fine line with the younger guys, who can do it, who can't, and then also placing the emphasis, like you said, whether it be yoga or whatever exercise you want to go through, to hip mobility program, whatever it is. But I think guys need to work on stuff like that, even at the younger age. It shouldn't just be a mask for, hey, he's not mobile, he can't move very well, just stick him on a knee back there. So really good point right there by you. And just to clarify, you talked about going to a knee, and then you talk about a secondary stance. I assume you mean traditional secondary stance where they're on 2 feet, right?
Yeah. I just call it a secondary
Sure.
stance. I think we've lost, I know you had your primary and your secondary. I don't know what we call it anymore, because everyone's just so much on a knee or kickstand or whatever, that we've lost the traditional or
Yeah,
secondary stance.
it's very individual. That's true. It's much more fluid, I guess we can put it that way. Even if people
Yeah.
are in a primary stance, it looks very different for a lot of players. So that's interesting. Now, at what age do you think a guy maybe could start touring around with the one knee stance, in a runner on base situation? Is that something younger guys should even toy with? Because there's some guys in the big leagues doing it and they're having success. And I know there's a number of high school guys and college guys that are trying it. It seems like most are still in a traditional secondary stance. But what would your thoughts be if somebody were going to transition? Do they need to have a certain level of arm strength? Is it a certain range of motion when they block? What do you think kind of goes into that?
Yeah. So I can tell you none of my guys are on a knee with runners on base. And that's not dictated by me. That's how comfortable they are. They're very good on a knee for 13 years old.
Mhm.
But I think it's really tough at maybe, I would say, maybe start playing around with it high school age,
Mhm.
because I think it's very tough still at 13 and 14. Your boys' bodies are changing. They're going through a lot. Um, Again, to ask them to kind of be anchored down and then be able to throw from that position. Plus, 13, 12, 13, you're going to the big field. There's a lot of factors in baseball that aren't like any other sport. Um, we use, I don't think basketball or football, the field never changes, right? The
Right, right.
field side really necessarily never changes. Baseball, I know in football and basketball, they do use smaller balls. Um, we use the same size ball. So hand size makes a difference. I just think there's so many variables for a kid to have to deal with, that throwing another wrench into that whole thing just isn't the time for it, at the 13 and below, maybe 14 and below. So, and again, you'll have some outliers who are just uber talented. Go for it. But I think it's the player's comfortability with doing it, and can he actually do it? Do you see a difference in how his throwdowns are, the accuracy, and things like that? And at the younger ages, I'm not so much necessarily about arm strength. I'm about more of mechanics and things like that. So I want to see those things be real clean and real crisp, because again, eventually with age and maturity, the arm strength will come along with that, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we're kind of talking about the stances, and as guys are getting a little bit older, I think that's a really good transition to kind of shift into the receiving stuff. One of the questions I get a lot from parents, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, since you're working with these guys, behind enemy lines day in and day out. The parents ask me, or coaches ask me, Coach, we see all the new receiving methods, on TV or on Twitter, where guys are manipulating the ball and guys are moving the ball. Should we start doing that at a young age, or should we wait until they get to high school and pitchers start throwing a little bit harder? What would be your thoughts on that?
I think if you have a guy that can catch proficiently, um, I think there's no problem with starting to get him to manipulate the baseball. I think kids, at least mentally, can handle a lot more than sometimes we as coaches give them credit for. And sometimes I think physically they can do that as well. I had let's see, he was at 9. We were throwing kind of bullpens like I used to catch, and the little kid was catching the bullpen, and I just saw him, and he received the ball differently than any of the other kids. And he's actually on our team, and he's one of our catchers today. So he's been manipulating the baseball for quite some time. One big thing that I do notice with kids manipulating baseballs at a younger age is off a machine, you can make the kids will look great. You throw a live pitcher in there and they don't know where the ball is necessarily going because, they're still pitchers are still learning. They're still erratic at this age. It goes back to the traditional just catching. You might start with your glove on the ground, but you're just catching. You're not really manipulating. So that's the biggest thing personally with my guys that I'm trying to get them more comfortable with, because no one wants to get hit with a 60, 70, 80 mile an hour fastball in the chest and be laid on it. So I think that's the biggest difference when talking about manipulating with young kids, is they can look really good off machines because where the ball is going to be once they get somewhat proficient at it. But throw a live pitcher in there, and I think it changes the game for them, honestly.
That's a really interesting observation, and I don't think I've necessarily heard anybody else speak about that. So I kind of want to kind of expand on that, because I think you're probably absolutely right. In my mind, I think in analogies a lot, and a lot of times I think hitting. Well, when you hit, or if you hit off a machine that's just throwing fastballs away, and you're taking an oppo round, I mean, that's pretty easy to do. When you're receiving and the pitch is coming in at one velocity at one location, for the most part, with a little bit of variability, it becomes, a little bit easier. Once you have that randomness thrown in there with a live pitcher, it becomes more difficult. So with that said, in your lessons and as you're, a private instructor working with guys, how does that kind of influence the drill work you choose? Do you start guys off of a machine to kind of have them learn the positions and the techniques and the movements, and then maybe more of the work goes into live bullpen or live arms, or kind of how do you work that in?
So at the younger ages, we'll start with some barehanded work. Tennis balls, just getting the feel for catching a ball. When we start to, my philosophy is always try and train 10% over what you're going to see. So if we're going to be off a machine, I want to train 10% over the velocity that they're most likely going to see for that age group. And I'm talking about probably one of the better throwers at that velocity at that age group. So we'll go to machines, but one of the best ways to add variability, honestly, is I love those C25 balls because they do move some of the heavier ones and stuff like that. And I also do like the set the machine on a curveball, because you're having some movement and a little bit more. It's not as sure as, hey, I know this fastball is going to be right here. And honestly, if you can get some of your machine balls that have some scuffs on them and things like that, that's not too bad either. And then we'll transition into doing some bullpen work. I know during COVID, we had some guys come out and we would just throw some bullpens, maybe a pitcher and a catcher. If you wanted to get in some work, a dad would call me up and I'd, set something up to get some pitchers and catchers out there, because we were shut down from like March to maybe May-ish, June-ish. So I think there was a lot of growth in some of our catchers at that point, but the more you can get your catcher catching live bullpens with working off a machine as well, I think the more proficient they're going to get at manipulating a baseball, because you're not going to see it right away. It's going to take a while. You're going to be like, man, he looks really good off the machine. And then you're going to watch, if you really pay attention, when he's catching a bullpen, he's not manipulating the ball as much, as well, or as much as he does off the machine, because he just doesn't know and doesn't trust that pitcher. And I don't necessarily blame him, because they're all learning and they're all trying to grow at the same time. So I think, I think that's the best way, is a combination of machine and a lot of bullpen work.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Like I said, I like to hear you say that, and I think that's really good advice for a lot of people out there listening that are working with guys in this age group, and even working with guys that are older, especially as maybe some of them are trying to learn the newer techniques or learn how to manipulate the ball. I think that's great advice. So like I said, I know you work, with the team, I think the Burn in Florida, and you also, do private lessons
Mhm.
and stuff. When it comes to the private lesson and the private instruction, what do you mostly focus on? And again, I know each player's individual, each guys have different strengths and weaknesses they need to work on. But if you had to give me a standard template, if I'm coming to you, what would kind of your philosophy be as you're building these guys? How much time are you going to spend on receiving? What are the other skills that you feel like are most important? And then kind of what would be some other progressions to progress the other skills as well?
Yeah, so for me, I'll be perfectly honest with you. Throwing is the last thing.
Hmm.
I think receiving is going to be number one. Catching the baseball, manipulating the baseball is number one, and where a majority of the time would be spent while working with me. Um, because, like I said, that I can make you look really good off of a front flip, then I can make you look really good off a machine, or you can make yourself look really good. Excuse me. But once that pitcher gets in there, it's a whole different ball game. So a lot of time needs to be spent to that, to where we can get you to look as good off the machine as you do off the pitch, off the pitcher. So it would probably be receiving is a bulk of the work. Blocking is the next, and then throwing, or how do I want to put this? Throwing for me isn't super important right now for younger kids. I think being able to transfer the baseball correctly and efficiently, and being able to get the baseball out of your hand correctly and efficiently, and obviously your footwork as well. Those are the three main factors that I would rather look at than arm strength. I know a lot of people put a lot of time into arm strength, and that's totally fine. My personal opinion is, if you want arm strength, I'll send you to an arm strength guy. We have the Florida Baseball Ranch. Go train that. They'll teach you how to use your body. There's the Texas Baseball Ranch. There's Driveline. There's a lot of resources out there. But I want your throwing mechanics from the standpoint of, like I said, your feet, your transfer, your release. I want that to be really crisp and really clean. And to me, the arm strength is the last piece of the puzzle, because it's such a different variable. Because I don't know if you're going to be 5'10" or 6'3" or 6'6" and 200 and some pounds. I can't predict that. Only God can. And so I like to train the things that we can work on, and we know what will get better, not what will get better with maturity and things like that. So like I said,
Absolutely.
probably receiving's number one, blocking's number two, and then, like I said, we'll get into what I call throwing, but it's more transfers, release, footwork, stuff like that.
I agree. I think it's kind of a tricky subject. I think if you look from a run prevention standpoint, statistically or sabermetrically, I think you're absolutely right. I think throwing has less value than receiving, and probably less important than blocking. But I also know that, for guys that are maybe a little bit older, high school age guy, they feel like the throwing is kind of the gateway to getting recruited. And I feel like the catching world is evolving, and as coaches and scouts, we're getting better, and we're not just grading that one tool. But I know a lot of guys still feel like, hey man, if I don't throw, a 2-1 or a 2-0 or whatever the number is, I've got no shot to get looked at by a college coach or by a scout. And I think there's a little bit of reality to that. So I feel for those guys. It's one of those things that people put a lot of emphasis on, and I put a lot of emphasis on it too, because I know it's important to guys. But at the end of the day, I know it's probably not the most important skill. I'm with you, absolutely. I think the bulk of our time should be spent receiving, and kind of doing the other smaller things inside the game. But I want to get back to blocking with you, and I'm with you. So if I was working with one player for, let's say, 1 hour, and that's all I had, if I had to guess, I'd say we'd probably spend 35 minutes on his setups and receiving. I'm kind of bulk clumping that into one. We'd probably spend 15 minutes on blocking, so to speak, and then we'd probably spend the rest of the time on throwing or another skill. So as we kind of talk about the blocking, what are some of the things, or maybe some of the drills you do with the younger guys who are, starting to embrace the ball, hitting off their body, and kind of how do you progress that? Like I said, I thought you had a really good progression for the receiving, and the manipulating the ball. Do you do anything similar blocking? Do you start with a maybe a simpler drill and get a little more complex and advanced as they get a little better?
Yeah, yes. So I mean, I do this even with our 13-year-olds. And I guess let me take a step back and say, if I have a young kid and he's not used to getting hit by a baseball, I think one of the best thing is two knee down setup. Um, glove 5 hole, and use some tennis balls or something like that, just to get them used to having, or they make those rag balls.
Hmm.
Um, just to make them, just to have them get used to something hitting them. Because I mean, the first thing, if someone throws something at you, you're going to turn or put your hands up or whatever. So I think it's important to just get them feeling comfortable with that, and that's not going to hurt them. And it's not just sit there and pelt them with balls. It's do it light and just get them comfortable, dip their toe in the water. Now, if we're talking about a guy that's a little bit older, and he's a catcher at this point, I always like to start off with some dry blocks. And the dry blocks for me aren't necessarily, it's more of working on what I call, excuse me, knee work. Um, so let's say I'll set up a ball right down the middle, and whether you want to replace or you want to, your knees to go forward, that's up to you. I think it all depends. And then we'll set up a ball on either side, on the inside of on the inside of each foot to block, and then we'll set up a ball on the outside of each foot. So what the balls on the outside of each foot we call our extended blocks, and that'll be more of a kickstand block. And the balls on the inside of the foot, those are just kind of, regular blocks. But the knee work to me, if it's to my glove hand side, it'll be right knee down, then left knee follows, and then right knee up to recover. So I think that I don't see a whole lot of people talking about knee work when blocking, and maybe I just haven't seen it. But if you watch some of the guys, Tucker Barnhart, is one of the best at it, and I watch his knee work, and that's pretty much what he does, and that's one of the places that I got it from. So that would be really the start of how the progressions we go into, and then we'll go into off a machine would be the next. And I'll use the like I said, the rag balls for them, and we'll do those same blocks that we just went over in dry blocks, and we'll do those off a machine. So that's kind of the progression. And I also like to get into what I call glove work as well. So I've seen recently, and I was always like, I don't think that's right. I thought you were just supposed to put the glove down and let it hit you, right? But if you watch guys like Yachty and stuff like that, they almost kind of, it's like an infield, and almost kind of like funnel it back to their body, like move that glove and almost kind of catch it, I guess you'd say. So we work a lot of that too, where we'll be on two knees, and I'll bounce it, and they'll manipulate that glove and work on their glove work with that as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know you said most of your guys, or maybe all your guys, are still in their traditional secondary stance with runners on base. And I guess over the past year or so, the conversation around that has really grown. It's kind of morphed into guys in a one knee stance with runners on base. And there's two sides of it. Throw the receiving out the window. I think everybody would agree that we can become a better receiver that way. It's easier to work under the ball. It's easier to give the umpire a better view, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to blocking, there's kind of two camps out there. I feel like some guys feel like being on a knee limits the range of motion and how much distance you can cover, how much ground you can cover. And other guys feel like it doesn't inhibit you at all, and you're actually a better blocker off of one knee. And like I said, I don't want to put you on the spot, because I know most of you guys aren't in a one knee stance with runners on base. But have you toyed around with that, or what are your thoughts on that based on just what you've seen and what you've maybe seen your guys do in practice?
Yeah, I mean, we still work on it, because we are from a knee down, at least receiving. And I mean, I always tell the guys, because they're getting a little bit older now. You never know who's watching you at these tournaments, and I think that's a good mindset to have going into college, or excuse me, going into high school. And so we do definitely practice it. I think whichever knee is up is the easier side to block to for them, because they just really have to roll that knee over the ankle to get out there. I think where I find them having the hardest time is to push off of the knee that's up and push to, the left or the right, whichever one's down. So I can tell you that is a struggle, at least for them. And it's something we've worked on, but we haven't necessarily perfected. And again, I think the big league guys can do it and look really good at it, but we're also talking about grown men that squat ridiculous amounts of weight and have the leg strength and stuff like that. And I'm dealing with more of kids that are just starting to get into weights and sometimes get anchored a little too much on that leg or whatever. So I think it's a fine balance, but I think you can also, like I said, dip their toes in the water with it. And if you got a guy that's proficient at it, let him go do it. I mean, I've got no problem. I've got no problem with that. But I don't necessarily think, for me watching even older guys, I don't necessarily know that how much it limits, range, because I do think that you can do certain things that we work on, like a big miss when it's, you've got no shot at blocking this. So we've got to do certain stuff with our legs to get out there. And I think you can do that stuff with even from a knee down position.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like there's some, like I said, two kind of camps or two schools of thought. So I would say the more old school mentality, at least the way that I was, taught growing up, and I feel like a lot of others are the same, that if it's thrown to the dirt, you block it. If it's anywhere, if it's in the air, you catch it. If it's in the dirt, you block it. I don't care if it's 6 feet behind the batter or if it's above the backstop. Like, you do everything you can to stop it. And I feel like recently we're starting to see more of a trend online of people kind of, I hate to say conceding, but they kind of concede like, okay, there are some balls that are not blockable. And, that I think I said it in one of the last podcasts. It's a tricky situation for me because I want catchers to have the mentality that every time something comes our way, our job is to block. And that is your job, whether it's easy or difficult. Our job is to stop balls in the dirt and catch balls in the air. But then, like I said, you see these other guys that kind of concede, hey, that was a huge miss. Right, we were set up a backdoor slider to a lefty from a right-handed pitcher. He misses at the batter's, back foot. Really, really difficult, pitch to block. So do we just concede, or what's the mindset? So aside from the mechanical stuff, I guess is what I'm trying to ask. What's the mindset and the approach that you teach your guys at that age? Just in regards to blocking.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have or at least I teach the mindset of block. You need to keep that ball off the backstop, period. I've had, and I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed with kids, and it's just kids in general, is accountability. Sometimes they're growing up, right? So they want to say, oh, this wasn't my fault or whatever. So I think if we have the mentality of I should block everything, then the accountability is always 100% on us. I had one of my catchers, it hit the plate, bounced over his head, not much he could do about it. And he said, it hit the plate, but I should have blocked it. Right. And he really probably knows that he didn't have much of a shot to block that pitch, but I like the accountability part of that, of, I still should have, I think I should have been able to block it. And if I don't think you ever push yourself, if you're like, well, that ball's out of my range, that ball's out of my range. Well, maybe it's out of your range today, but maybe if you train and 2 weeks from now, it's not out of your range. But if I always say that's out of my range, I'm never going to try and push past that barrier. So I never want to be limited or limit them in that mentality. So we are always, hey, if it's thrown behind the guy, we've worked on a big miss, and you got to figure it out. I mean,
Yeah.
and again, it's they're not in trouble for it, but I just want them to have that mentality of, it's on me to keep that off the backstop.
I
It was
love
a
that
mistake
approach.
before it got there. So
Yeah, I love that approach. And the word you said is accountability. I think that's huge. You know, when I was in college, we had a term, it was called TOB, transfer of blame. Anytime you made an excuse for anything, everybody was all over you, like TOB, TOB. They would just call you out for transferring blame, like, oh, I can't block that. It's his fault. He screwed it up. He should have thrown it, where I called it. And I think just having that accountability or having the mindset of accountability is really important, especially in all aspects, but especially when it comes to something as specific as blocking. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I really like the take you have with these youth guys like that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I sent out a book to my parents for the kids to read, Extreme Ownership. I think it's a great book. I think parents can read it honestly. We could all take a little bit more ownership. And kids, I think it's a great just incredible. I got so much from that book, and I think kids at the 13, 12, 13, they always, like you said, want to transfer blame. But if you take that extreme ownership, and that's what I try and preach to my catchers, take the extreme ownership, and you know whether it's with the umpire, whatever, we shouldn't have a problem, right? Like, you're gonna be the best you can be at that point. So
Absolutely. Now, I'll say this. So most of the guys that I work with are a little bit older. I'm working with guys who are a lot of high school guys, some college guys, a couple of guys are a little bit older than that. But at the age group that you're mostly around, whether through private instruction or through the travel ball team, what do you think overall are some of the biggest issues that you see? And like I said, I know you're a good instructor. That's why you're on here, and that's why we're talking to you. But I know you play against a bunch of other teams, and you probably see a lot of you probably see a lot. I'd be curious to hear what you think overall. If you had to, talk about a couple general themes that you think youth catchers or young guys should focus on or need to get better at, or we just need to improve, as a community. What kind of comes out? What sticks in your mind when I say that?
I guess a big debated topic this season, our catchers are going to 100% calling their own games. I used to call games, and I will no longer be taking over. I will no longer be taking over that duty. That's on them. It's been explained to them that, if we ask you, hey, why did you throw a curveball to the third batter, or number five, in this count? What was your reason for it? And I don't know isn't an acceptable reason. You have to have a reason for, and it's at this age, it's starting to get them to be accountability,
Mhm.
because you're going to be going to high school, I think kids, the mind kind of drifts in baseball a lot, because it's not constant action like baseball and football. And I think that becomes a real issue. So if I can start teaching that mentality of always be thinking, always be paying attention, now, I think it'll just do them a world of good for their high school careers. So I think that is one thing. Um, I can tell you, even at a little bit older ages, I hate to say this, but if I can go somewhere and I'm watching catchers, and I can pick out who your parent is as a catcher, it's probably not good for uh, future college guys. I did spend 1 year of looking at players and whatnot, for like I said, when I was a volley. But if I can if I know who your dad or your mom is, it's probably not a good idea. Now, that's something that's a little bit outside of their control, but maybe they're getting old enough to have that conversation, maybe with their parent.
So just to be clear for the parents who are listening right now, not to call anybody out, what would be an example of something that they would do that would give it away that's their child behind home plate?
Yeah, so again, I go back to that October one I was at in Sanford, that perfect game event. I mean, I saw a dad yell something and throw a water bottle spike a water bottle into the ground. I saw a dad talk to his catcher when he was on deck. Just let I think there was a big thing with Corona. Let the kids play. Just let the kids play. I mean,
Yeah.
you've I guarantee you've put so much money into this, because I know what travel ball costs and I know what lessons cost and things like that. don't shoot yourself in the foot with how your actions are. Like, they're starting to get to the age where they'll figure it out on their own, especially at the 14, 15 and 16-year-old levels. So I don't know that I necessarily answered that question from a youth standpoint, but yeah, I the other thing I think is talking to umpires. I'm struggling with my team right now because they all want to talk to each other. They talk to each other all the time. I mean, you and I used to have to go over to each other's house to play video games to see each other. These guys, they can be on different states and still be in contact with each other. So talking with each other, pitcher catcher relationships and umpire catcher relationships, I think is something that we need to spend a little bit more time on. Last season I had a catcher come up to me and said, the umpire told me I'm moving the ball too much and he would have given me a strike if I didn't move that ball. And I said, so it was a strike before you moved the ball, right? And he said, well, yeah, I guess so. So I said, all right, just tone the movement down a little bit. And he's like, yeah, that's what I did. And I got the strike on the next one. But I think you have to know that umpire. And if he's giving you clues, again, I always say, like, the game is the test, the team, the umpire, they'll give you the cheat sheet to the test. You just have to have the foresight and be paying attention to the answers they're giving you. One thing we are working on this year is different in our setups is different angles. But I want you to talk to the umpire to make sure, hey, if I give you this window, are you comfortable with it? Because if you're not, you know, we're not going to be getting as many strikes and because you're shying away and you're getting a little gun shy. And they also know, like, if you're going to give them that window, you can't be getting them blown up back there at all.
Yeah. No doubt about that, man. So you actually talked about three separate things there, and I don't want to shift gears on you, but I want to go back and touch on all three. I want to get to calling pitches, but before that, I'm going to say one thing about the parents, and then we can move on. So I think you're absolutely right when you talk about the parents. You don't want to stand out. And optically it looks bad. I think that's the number one reason that comes to mind. Like, oh my gosh, it looks bad if you're the dad that's handing over the Gatorade and the Snickers over the fence, or if you're going and talking to your son while he's on deck, or if you're slamming a water bottle on the ground every time there's a pass ball, a wild pitch. I get it. The optics look bad. But I think beyond the optics, I think players have to learn, that, hey, when I'm on the field, like I'm at war, I'm at battle, and I can only talk to the guys in the dugout. I can talk to my coaches. I can't be getting influenced by outside sources, even though that's your parent and they love you. That's just not how it works in sports. That's not how it works in life. If you go to the office and you have a bad day, you can't necessarily call your mom and she can tell you, hey, it'll be okay. And like, no, you got to hit the sales numbers, or you got to do whatever. And I think it's just kind of a lesson that a lot of guys need to learn. But I agree with, that was one thing I don't remember ever being a player and like speaking to somebody in the stand, like, no, game's on, man. It's time to shut it down, have tunnel vision, and tune everything else out there. So again, not to call any parents out, but I do think that is good advice. As we're trying to teach these young guys to grow up and have more accountability and become more responsible and also improve their skills as well. So,
yeah, I just to touch on that real quick. I do have a player on my team. He has two twin brothers. Who one's at Florida right now, one's at USF. And the dad had told me, I'm not sure which school it was, so I don't want to speak on that, but I know those guys some of the recruiters would show up in plain clothes and just sit with the parents, and people necessarily wouldn't know who they are. So, the guy who you don't know sitting next to you might be just Joe Blow who wants to go watch some good baseball, or it could be a kid that holds, maybe potential for your kid to get a scholarship or a little bit of money to extend his baseball playing time a little bit. So just, I guess, be more aware of what you're doing and who's around you, because it would be a heck of a thing for your player to get cost because of actions of a parent or something like that. So
I have firsthand experience with that. When I was a college recruiter, when you go out, you wear your logo, you wear a polo with your logo on it. I mean, you want people to know you're there. You're trying to show people like, hey, we're whichever school, state university, hey, I'm here. But in the summer, especially in East Cop, it rains. So you put on a raincoat that maybe doesn't have your school logo, and you're just in some plain black, you know, raincoat I got from Dick's, and it was it was amazing how much differently you got treated when you have a college logo on your shirt versus when you have just a plain black, you know, rain jacket, so to speak. So, a couple funny things. I'm not going to bring them up, but absolutely, you're 100% dead on with that. I want to get back to pitch calling. That's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and I've been speaking about it a little bit lately, and it's something that I find super interesting. And I think it's awesome that you guys are giving that responsibility to guys who are that young and just handing it over. It just tells me that, hey, we're going to let you learn. You know, don't get me wrong. We're going to try to teach you and we're going to try to help. But for you to learn and really get better, you just can't be a robot back there. You have to actually do it and have a thought process. So one of the things you said was, you know, I don't know is just not an acceptable answer. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think that it's super easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and say, oh, we shouldn't have thrown that pitch in this situation, or we should have thrown this, or we should have done that. But in the heat of the moment, you don't always know. And sometimes you make the right decision, but you have a bad outcome. Sometimes you make the wrong decision, but you still have a good outcome. So with that said, as you're trying to teach these young guys how to call pitches, and how to become better at it, you know, through reading hitters and knowing the situation and just understanding the game, what would be a couple of, I don't know if tools or exercises or drills, maybe things you do to help these guys learn how to become better at that?
Well, just to start off, I don't think there's ever a bad pitch called. I think it's always on the pitcher of a poorly executed pitch. So I'll just start off with that right there. But no, so one thing we do is when we throw bullpens, we'll go through. You know, I'll have a scripted bullpen. I'll have a scripted bullpen that day, but we'll also throw to batters, and I'll give them the type of hitter. You know, number 3 guy in the lineup, bigger guy. You know, looking spin to win, stuff like that. So we'll go through scenarios with that, and I'll give them like, hey, big swing and miss on that, or hey, you know, late on that fastball, and that's kind of how we can train it a little bit. One of the biggest things, and I don't do it because obviously I'm not in their homes with them, but I think you can. I did this as a pitcher, honestly, when I would watch MLB games. I got pretty good at predicting what the next pitch was without, you know, knowing their signs and whatnot. And it's, I think that it's invaluable. I mean, legitimately, catchers have it so much better than any other player watching baseball because you have them on the screen at all times. You can learn like that's the one position that you can learn so much from a big league guy, because they're on the screen the entire time, just about. And that's kind of the other thing of where I think we sometimes fall short is, you know, college or whatever, not to quit going off on a tangent, but, you know, we have a guy that touches the ball more times than anybody on on defense. And we don't have, you know, coaches for those guys. So I didn't want to get off on that little bit of tangent there, but it just kind of does irk me because, you know, you said something to me earlier about colleges and whatnot. And I've heard some colleges just say, you know, hey, there's this new one knee thing, go figure it out. Well, I mean, like, you're not going to Alabama and the quarterback that touches the ball more times than anybody else, he says, hey, there's a new way to throw a football. Go figure it out. Like that,
Yeah.
it's kind of foreign to me, honestly. So, you know, I don't know. Did I miss your question there? But I wanted to sneak that in there on.
No, that's great.
On that.
That's good. I think it's really good insight. You know, like I said, especially as things are changing, and because calling pitches it's just, I mean, I'd say it's 100% mental. Like you said, the physical aspect is the pitch executed or not. At younger ages, I would say you first have to define what degree of precision is acceptable. As you get to the big leagues, we have this level of precision. As we get to college and high school, the level of precision gets much broader, of what's acceptable. So a lot of times, even if we call the correct pitch, so to speak, if it's not executed, then it doesn't really matter, So I'm with you on that. For me, I'm with you. I think it's more about the purpose and the intent behind it. And was there a thought process? If there was a thought process, if I were to ask a catcher, hey, why did you, hey, on that number 2 hitter, why did we call that pitch 1-2? If he can say, well, because last at bat he did this, and I thought he was going to do that this time, and it looked like that, okay. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue that. I don't think there's rarely a time where it's just like, hey, that was wrong. A lot of times if the pitch is executed, it doesn't matter if it's if I call it, you call it, he calls it. If the pitch is executed, then it's more than likely going to be successful. So, I'm about that. So I like to talk and have conversations with the guys, and just to try to get them to learn a thought process. It doesn't mean they have to think exactly like me or they have to think exactly like someone else. But if we can teach them just how to start thinking on their own and what's the purpose behind a pitch, that's kind of the main goal for me.
Yeah, and to be quite honest with you, I mean, I'm not paid to win baseball games. I don't know of very many high school coaches that are necessarily paid to win baseball games. I understand on the collegiate level, it can get a lot different because there's a lot of money that some of those coaches are making. So I understand if they want to call pitches, but for me, I just think that it's really hard to get an 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kid to be engaged all the time. And I think catcher is one of those positions that you can keep them mentally engaged and mentally sharp, with holding them accountable for what pitch and where they're at in the lineup and things like that. It's not just, hey, put down signs and be a robot back there. I think
Yeah.
sometimes we can make robots back there when I think there's little to no thinking. If you're calling the pitches, and like I said, my I wouldn't say employment, but I'm not paid to win games. So if they make a mistake, we'll go get them the next game.
No, completely understand. I know exactly where you're coming from. So, and again, shifting gears a little bit, because you had mentioned a couple of things that I want to talk about. The last thing you talk about was, how players talk to each other, and communication is another topic that I feel very strongly about, and I've spoken about it a number of times. I've tweeted about it a lot. I feel like the most important, maybe the most important aspect of being successful is your ability to communicate. And I don't care if you're a salesman or a catcher. Obviously, there's a certain skill set required, but people of equal skill sets and talents, the ones that can communicate better, man, they go so much further. Like I said, whether it be a real world job in sales or in an accountant firm, or just being able to talk to teammates, talk to umpires, be able to communicate effectively with pitching coaches and head coaches, and so on and so forth. And I think that's one of the big topics, one of the big rocks. If we had to move things right now, guys just don't communicate a lot of times really well. So what would be something that you do to try to get your guys to become better communicators, with their teammates, but also with their coaches as well? I mean, do you have them, speak to the pitchers, or do you have them talk to them before practice, or what do you do to help guys become a better communicator? I guess what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about conversations. I have a pitcher on my team. He wants 7 signs ahead of the last pitch. Like, he wants to get on the mound and he wants to go. Like, and you can't always be that quick as quick as he wants it. So he would come in and ask me or say something to me, and I said, don't talk to me about it. Talk to your catcher about it, and vice versa. So taking myself or another coach out of that scenario to make them communicate with each other. Now, from time to time, I mean, one of the biggest questions I always get asked is, well, when you go out to them, what do you say? Because everyone always wants to know in the big leagues, like, what's going on in that mound visit. I mean, there's probably some pretty colorful mound visits I can imagine. Um, but I think for my area and my age group, you're not really getting on guys. You're not really getting on guys too much. It's more of just go out there and provide, a little bit of a breather and provide some confidence and some words of positivity. So, and one thing we do is we'll tell them, hey, go talk to them or something like that. And I think they're good at that. If they know, hey, I'm going out there to provide, what am I providing? I'm providing positivity. They take it on their own. Um, I still think they need to be told at this point when to go out there and when not to. But again, I'm hoping with the pitch calling and stuff like that, gets more of the flow and the feel of the game, to when they need to know that they can do that and stuff like that. One thing is you will be surprised at how many young, and when I say young, I'm talking anywhere between 11, 12. Um, they don't know number two is necessarily a curveball. They've been taught it's maybe a two seam fastball or something like that. So
Mm.
I've had a few years ago, had a couple catchers who, you know, I'm like, they're getting blown up by these pitches because they're not calling what the guy has said. And I said, well, did you let him know what the signs are? Did you talk to him? No. So I can tell you one thing: if we ever have a new kid that joins the team or whatever, that's one thing that's always 100% made sure of, and that's on them to make sure of it, because it's not my job, it's their job, it's their game. I'm just there, throwing down some signs at third base, and at that time calling some pitches, which I'm not even doing anymore. So I'm trying to be more of the 16U travel ball coach, where I just give you the old bunt sign or the swing away, and it's your game, it's your, I guess, for lack of a better term, it's your career. So
Sure.
I want you to do the things that are going to make you the most successful. And whether that's going to a knee, whether that's manipulating a baseball, whether that's communicating with your pitcher, learning how to call pitches, whatever can make you successful, that you don't have to depend on the easy button, meaning me or a high school coach or another travel ball coach. I want you to be 100% self-sufficient when you leave me, or you leave our team, or whatever. But yes, as for the communication standpoint, I think it's kind of just forcing them to communicate honestly. Like I said, you come to me, don't talk to me about it. Talk to your pitcher, talk to your catcher. um, you get blown up by a pitch. Do they know what you're throwing, or do you know what they're throwing? Because that's not their fault, that's your fault. You have to go and talk to them about it.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things I can tell you for a young kid is, like, first and third signs and being loud. They're still not comfortable with themselves as an adolescent. So we make them at practice get real loud. Like, hey, did you guys hear that short? No, I didn't hear that. Hey, you got to do it again. Do it louder. Do it
Yeah.
louder. To where they get to a certain point, because you got parents yelling. You got four fields back to back. Everyone's really close, and it's really hard, and they're just not comfortable in their own skin. So I think one-on-one they're getting a little bit more comfortable, but being broadcasting to the entire field is still sometimes a little bit of a fight, but they pick it up pretty quick. Like I said, bunts inside, outside, stuff like that. Just make them do it over and over again until they're getting, a little bit boisterous and in their speech there.
Yeah, I know for me personally, that was a lesson that I didn't learn until I got to junior college. My junior college coach, Kenny DuPont, he forced us to communicate, forced the catcher to be loud and yell. I mean, to the extent where literally the first week of all four semesters there, I lost my voice. I mean, you're constantly screaming, and it's funny looking back, but at the time, that was a skill set that I didn't have in high school. I guess it wasn't asked of me, or I didn't understand that's what I needed to do. And having a coach that actually, reinforced it and pounded it into me every single day. I thought it was very valuable, for my development moving forward. So
Yeah, and that's one of the things I try and tell these guys is, it takes zero talent to do stuff like that. There's no talent in communication. There's no talent in speaking loud. there's no talent in cheering your teammates on and picking them up when they're down or talking to your pitcher. That little stuff and attention to detail goes a long way. And there's not a lot of talent that goes into that, and it can make you a really good ball player. And like I said, it just takes effort. That's it.
Yep. Absolutely, man, Jarrod. That's good info. And like I said, I've been on here a little over an hour, so like everybody, I want to be respectful of your time and not keep you on here for 3 hours straight. But fantastic, man. A lot of good info. I enjoyed talking to you. Definitely, I got a couple pages full of notes here, so things that I wrote down and I'm going to work on as well. But before I let you off here, is there anything else you wanted to say or anything else you wanted to put a plug for in?
No plugs, but one of the biggest things is to youth parents, like you, and I know you had asked me this earlier, but if you're looking for quality instruction or things like that, I guess the thing I will actually plug, I lied. The thing I will plug is CatcherCon. Pretty much changed the game for me. So I want to give you a big thanks for that. Guys like Swanee, Coach Todd, Jerry, yourself, Craig Driver, all those videos are available if you haven't gone. And I mean, just such a huge resource. Like I said, I wasn't a catcher, so I started as an open book and had to learn somewhere. But there's so much information out there that if you're not learning, it's 100% on you. And I don't think any parent wants to do that. I think they want to do the best for their son or daughter. So there's plenty of resources, at least to get your foot in the water, and then kind of go from there. So just do your research and be an open books. Try and sponge it up, because the catching Twitter and catching community is actually pretty frictionless, I'd say. So I'm sure you'll be welcome with open arms. If you have questions, DM me or any of the other guys, because right now I'm just kind of standing on the shoulders of giants out here, learning from all you guys. So
No, I think we're all trying to do the same thing, and that's the neat thing about the catching community. I mean, you can learn from anybody, whether it be a softball instructor doing something or somebody in the big leagues doing something. There's a large spectrum of people in different positions and different jobs, and for the most part, almost all of them are willing to share, and just reach out and talk to people, whether you know them or you don't know them or you don't have a relationship or whatnot. So that is neat about the catching community. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm the same. That's the reason I do this. It's just, it gives me an opportunity to get on a call and talk catching for a little while and learn some things. And like I said, I mean, I learned something earlier today. I don't work with that many younger guys anymore, but I hadn't thought about the progression, where they're really good off a machine and they struggle going towards, live arms. So in regards to some of this new stuff. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that. But Jarrod, man, I appreciate you coming on, appreciate your time and the info, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. And I'll put your info on the screen so everybody can find it, and definitely give him a follow and check out his information. So Jarrod, man, thanks again. It's good talking to you.
thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. And thanks for letting me be a part of this.
No problem, man. Thanks.